idea, thank you. But here it talks about the Youth Voice, Your Voice Matters survey shows school safety at 68%. And for grades 4 to 5, when I go instead to okay, I lost it because of the title, all that stuff. Never mind. I'll come back to the point I was going to make. The Youth Voice Matters, Your Voice Matters survey shows 68%. And if I look at the SAL survey, it's either 41% or 51%. So the two surveys are totally different in terms of the safety, school safety. The other thing I would note is in my invitation, I quoted some figures about the uncertainty, the 95 percentile certainty of these figures. I was looking at the employee chart. And so the answer is those numbers are probably double what the uncertainty would be for the student chart. But even so, the student numbers, 95%, are good to maybe 1%. And if you start breaking down to anything less than the total student body, it goes up to 2, 3, 5, 8, 10%. So how do we interpret changes that are maybe 1% or 2 when they report from Panorama that something went up or down 2 points, up 1 point? What's our responsibility to understand that? Is it worth commenting? Do we take the numbers at face value? What do you do for public policy? I'd love some thoughts about the uncertainty in this. And
what does it mean to the average person?
And if we report it, well, again, if you look at some of the data, it'll say that the school trusted adult is 85%. And then if you look at another place on the same page, it's 78%. The answer is one of them is an aggregate number of 2 or 3 questions, and the other one is they picked the high question. So what do we want to tell anybody that asks us, or anybody we push data to, either pull or push, about the data?
Well, I guess, is the data in conflict? Because if we have multiple data sources that indicate the same patterns, it just really validates it, I would think. It makes it stronger, even if it is a little bit different. I can't complain to be, I can't, pretend to be an expert here though. But I would think if the data is similar, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I didn't look at the margin of error, but I mean, if we're talking, 5%, I'm not gonna throw any doubt on that. I'm just wondering if there's the theme, trying to find the theme.
So if we were looking at students academically, we'd say we like them to be 80, 90% and of high quality. Here we're looking at numbers that are 50, 60%. So whether the number is 68% or 51% or 41%, if you're talking about school safety, that means 10,000 of our students don't think it's safe. They didn't respond that way. So that the magnitude of these the specific numbers don't matter much, is I think what you said, Robert, and I think that would be what I was driving at, is not to pay attention to the specific numbers because they're different on different surveys. There's some uncertainty already. And as soon as you start looking at ethnic groups or individual schools, the statistical uncertainties get very large. But even very large and a low number is still a low number. So it is really not an analysis of the data we're looking at, but rather of the issues our students have And how do we help those students with any of these attributes that we've measured? And I think that comes down to what are the important things to remind people of, what are the attributes we want to focus on? What are the problems? So I would be very happy to open the floor. If anybody has some good news data in here, and I think the trusted adults one is probably the only one I saw that's pretty good news. But if you have other thoughts of good news, I'd love it. And if you're thinking of problems, let's talk about them.
So about that question, the safety at school, do we know, or is there any question in the survey where they ask what is make them feel unsafe at school? If it's because the shootings around, school shootings in America, or bullying, or anything else? Because this is a very, very general question, and did they ask, if it's this or this or this? And because I didn't see anything like that in the survey, but I don't know if in the schools they ask those questions or they talk about that. Do you know?
A number of those questions where you're asking, what's the next step down? They didn't show them as rated. They were information to someone not available at the moment to the public. I don't know if they'll ever be made public or not, but students were asked about bullying in particular. I don't know if they were asked about the effect of lockdowns, but there were a number of items that were shown as not scored, I think is the word Panorama used. And those tend to be the ones that would go into the explanation of why, what does that question mean? What are the nuances of it? So it is there somewhere. I think we might want to ask about the data details.
Yes, I am assuming now with the news that Arlington County changed all the locks in the schools, and I'm assuming also the schools are sending that information to the students. Probably if it's about, people getting into the school that are not part of the school or bad people, as the children will call them, maybe that will make them feel a little less unsafe. I'm assuming that kind of positive news.
I can't tell, Carolina, are you asking about overall? I have open the Your Voice Matters, and the questions are things like related to bullying, peers, students physically hurting you, things like that. It doesn't mean that general fears wouldn't contribute to a response for a question about safety, but it looks like the questions we asked were about students hurting you or bullying and stuff like that. And whether students reported. Maybe Grace, what are the unscored? I had that question. What does unscored mean? Because when you click on it, you can get some information there.
Sure, for Your Voice Matters, the unscored are just open-ended questions. So the ones that wouldn't have been on the Likert. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they were off the top of my head. But.
Like here's, if this happened more than once, did the same students physically hurt you each time? Where did this occur? Did you report the incident to school staff?
So there's no way to know. So those are considered unscored because there is no favorable response to that, right? So it's not so much that it's There's just no favorable response there. When you look at those percentages, the percentages are favorable responses.
If I click on the question, then it says yes and no, and it breaks it down by percentage. Answer distribution, yes and no.
Sure, but there's no favorable response. So were you bullied? You know, there's no, I'm not looking at it directly, but for the, did you report it? Yes or no, there's no favorability to that. So that's why there's no score attached to it.
What's the difference between favorability and the answer yes?
So yes just means that you reported it. I mean, is it good to know that they reported it? I mean, there's no attachment of action to that. So when we look at the Likert where it's like, it's been a long weekend. I gotta pull up the survey.
Sorry, yeah.
No, I've got to pull up the survey.
And maybe it's on the website, the explanation. I just haven't looked at that.
There isn't, but it's just telling you that there's just no favorable response. We don't really want to know. I mean, once you know that a kid's been bullied, the only kids that say yes or no that they reported it are already the kids that are bullied. So is that a positive response? Is that something I mean, we can look at that when it comes to action items, but as far as favorability and whether that's something that is good, we're still looking at the kids that were bullied or said they were bullied. So it's not going to be part of that overall score for anything.
Yeah, the positive outcome is not going to be positive. Go into the positive column. So it doesn't get included in the plus score, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so when you look at, and then also, John, just following back up on your, the safe, you said there was an inconsistency in whether or not students felt safe in school on the SEL versus the Your Voice Matters. The Your Voice Matters asks a specific, like how safe do you feel in school? Whereas the SEL just asks, do you feel safe? Just in general. Yeah. So the question is, during the past week, how often did you feel, and then you fill in excited, happy, loved, safe, hopeful. So we can't really compare those two questions because they're asking vastly different things.
What I was concerned about with regard to the data, Grace, is that I don't disagree that the questions were different, but they're not reported with different terminology. They both report school safety. And so anyone that doesn't know the specific questions would say the data is inconsistent. And then you can't believe it because 41% versus 68%, those are big differences. And I also would think that all the ones not reported, they don't necessarily go into a favorable, unfavorable score, but they're critical to know about any actions one might take to help the kids. And so I think that should really be made as available. I don't know to whom it's available and who would see it, but if there's somebody going to analyze what do we do about bullying, it'd be nice to have all that data really pretty present, and to people that would, might be on a data committee, not this one necessarily, but one appointed by APS or good friends of somebody on the board that's a good statistician and they want to look at it and whisper in some ear. But without the public being able to see those answers, you sit there saying, oh, what a shame, the kids don't feel safe. Is that because they worry about school shooting, or is that because they're bullied? And so it is very hard to deal with these just saying, oh, too bad. And when I go through the survey, and as I say, when the Your Voice Matters and the SL surveys come up with numbers in the 40 to 60% range, that's not what makes me think our kids are doing well in terms of the personal issues of their lives. So I would hope we can get those released, and maybe that's the part of the point of what we should say. That may be the main thing we can contribute is release it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you tell me specific, like where specifically is something not?
The answers are all in there.
Well, not
Right.
reported. Okay. I clicked on not reported, and I didn't get much. It said, you know,
Is it not reported or unscored?
unscored probably.
Oh, okay. So I mean, it just means unscored just means that it's not part of the overall favorability. It doesn't go into anything.
But the data is still
But the
available.
data's there.
Readily?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, good.
It's there. It's just not going to be on that. I mean, you just have to click on the question like you would for any of them to see what the
Okay.
breakdowns are, but you're not going to get, yeah, it's there. It's just not right there, but it's under the question.
So well, somebody flagged the safety, I think, because I raised it initially with the two different numbers. What other issues warrant looking at the details? What else are you worried about in particular? Scores that are low. I mean, we can go across the board and say, well, kids need help in every direction. That's correct. But how about any suggestions for what else you'd like to look at?
I think emotional regulation stood out when we last met
Yeah,
as being a lot lower than the national average. And I don't have a solution in my back pocket, but that's something that jumped out, I think, at the group.
I guess I make a comment about national average. How much do we care if we're above, below, or at the national average if the kids are scoring 40, 50, 60? Any thoughts on that? It may tell us it's hard to change, but does it tell us that it's not worth doing?
I think no matter what is the percentage, I think that this is a very important, very important topic we have to work on. One of the most important probably. Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, you're unmuted for a reason.
Yes, I'm seeing if I am here. Okay, so I would say emotional regulation, just in the work that I do in the preschool, kind of the primer to elementary school, we do a lot of work in this category. And when our children move up to elementary school, I do get feedback from parents that this is an area where their children have trouble in the transition from preschool early childhood education to elementary school. And it could be because there's just a lack of emphasis in the classroom curriculum. And probably there's more so in the elementary than you would have in middle school and high school, but it's definitely a thread that we start very early. And sometimes it's a shame to see that it kind of trails off as they grow up.
Other? Bullying or safety and emotional regulation?
Another one is self-efficiency, efficacy, and how the percentage of the minority students are higher than the rest in that area. And it's interesting, it says gifted students report about average across all topics. So I think in that topic, as we see gifted students, because they report about average across all topics, I believe they do because they are motivated. They have programs, especially for them to work on that are interested to them. And it should not be just for the gifted students, it should be for everybody, you know, work on groups in the schools. I know staff is you know, sometimes a problem and time, but self-efficacy, I think it can be, it can be successful if we bring in tutors or volunteers to do this kind of you know, programs for them. John, you are muted.
That's because there was a flyover going to Arlington Cemetery, and so the Blue Angels or somebody drowned out everything here. Sorry about that. Sierra, you dropped out for a moment before while we were introducing ourselves. John, you're new. So Sierra, if you'd introduce yourself now and then John next, and then we'll move back into the program itself.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sierra Wright. I'm the administrative specialist here at Arlington County's Children's Behavioral Health Bureau. I am new to Arlington. Well, I guess it's about to be a year, so I'm happy to be here. Bless you, John.
I'm John Huntley. I was here last week. I apologize for being late today. I just got stuck in a meeting for a little longer than I was hoping. Yes, an Arlington resident in Lyon Village, and yeah, looking forward to contribute.
John, not to summarize, but to make a couple points. We were looking first at some of the apparent inconsistency in the data, that the school safety is very different on the Youth Voice Matters and the SEL survey. And we came to a conclusion that said, it doesn't matter a whole lot in terms of policy, whether something is 40, 50, or 60%, because in every case, it's a low number for school safety. We should investigate it and go for it. So the concerns about the precision of the data are pretty much, we're dropping and saying, these are important issues. We picked 3 so far. One was school safety, and one's emotional regulation. And one, Carolina, yours was, I was going on mute and back off mute.
Self-efficacy.
Yep, self-efficacy. And so I think we'll wind up listing all 5 or 6 of them and saying they need improvement. So maybe it's a point to go back and look at policies related to that. So you did not have a chance to make any comments on introductory or where we were or where we should be going. If you'd like, you have the floor.
No, I mean, I spent a little bit of time looking at the data, and I didn't get, I spent a lot of time looking at the faculty data, but I think what struck me is that there's such a massive difference in participation this year compared to last year that I really just didn't know what to read into it. I mean, people seem much more angry about stuff, but it's also, it could easily be self-selection. So I didn't know, I wouldn't know what to say about it because the participation is so different. So I didn't look quite as much as the stuff that you guys were talking about, but so I didn't have like strong opinions on anything. I just spent a lot of time looking at that, at mostly the staff responses.
Those are clearly different from the bus drivers and everybody else.
John, I looked too a lot at the faculty and teacher aspect and some of the different levels of employees. And so interestingly, both in the student surveys and in the adult and the faculty surveys, the growth mindset is actually a category that I was interested in digging in a little more on. Because staff seem to think that they didn't have the potential to change factors that affected their jobs, the way they taught in their schools, and you see in growth mindset in the student section that they also, there was some issues there. So I just kind of thought that was a little overarching. through both sets.
I certainly agree with you with the student stuff. I think that's worth looking into. I think the thing that worries me about the faculty is that we had like 2/3 participation rate last year, and then 1/3 this year. It's down like almost a half. And I just wonder if it's, if it's the people who are angry about stuff are the ones responding, and the people who are okay, like for whatever reason this year, just did not feel the need to respond to the survey again. And so we've sorted them out and selected them out. So it was a little tricky for me to read too much into the staff stuff as far as that was. But the students, it seemed more comparable across years, and the issues that you mentioned were there, I think, for both. So I felt, I think that makes sense.
So anecdotally, though, I would put, as a employee, I would say that the people who didn't respond are not the people who are doing well. They are just too angry. They don't trust the system. They don't believe that this is going to make any difference, and so then they just don't waste their time. Anecdotally.
Yeah, I mean, that makes absolute sense, but I think in order to identify that in the survey, we actually need like a randomized with high response rate. We don't need every single staff member's response to get value. What we need is high participation, and random selection and high participation, so that we don't know, so that we're much more certain that we're getting the results that actually represent their views.
Right. But I would also caution you against looking at Your Voice Matters for secondary, especially with the 9th to 12th graders. We have 3 high schools in Arlington. One of them did not participate for Your Voice Matters. So
that's true too. Yes, I did notice that.
Yeah, just a little caution there with the 9th to 12th grade responses for students.
That one worried me a little less, because at least that was just one school, and I don't know why they did or did not participate, but I don't know that, there's nothing that indicates that there's some reason common to those people other than the fact that they're in the same school, like, whether they're having a qualitatively different experience or something that caused them to not respond. Whereas with the teachers, it's trickier. Although, if you say anecdotally, there's probably a lot of value in the survey. I'm just not exactly sure how to quantify it.
So Grace?
Well, I think therein lies a topic in terms of how do we get people to respond to surveys. As a parent, I received I'm sure I received a lot of emails on this, but a lot of them, I read them all. But you had to dig pretty deep, and it was pretty laborious process to get into it. So just in general, how do we get people to respond to these surveys?
Grace, why was one of the high schools didn't participate?
There is no answer to that other than it was not administered by administration.
Can you share which high school that was?
It was Washington Liberty.
Okay.
There are no answers. I have no answers. This went above my head when I'm just a lowly cube worker. But it was taken far above me, and I have no information other than it just didn't happen.
Well, that's interesting, given how important we think this data is for making changes. Yeah. One issue that we haven't brought up is, I think, the difference in the opinions of the parents and the students as to how stressed the students are. And the parents really didn't seem to understand what the students were believing of themselves. So it's a total disparity. Kids are saying 25–30% aren't stressed, and the parents are saying 70-some% aren't stressed. So is there something in there for parent education? Is there some way to, does it matter that the parents don't think their kids are stressed? If we have numbers of stress that are among the highest scores negative on this particular, any of these surveys, that's been true before, but I think it's much higher this year than it was 2 years ago. I didn't find it last time. Is there something we should be doing, recommending about student stress? Is it obvious what's causing it other than external circumstances? Can APS do anything?
I believe that now that the project piece is launching the campaign Askable Adult in this fall, I believe that probably will help the students to have somebody to go to talk to what they are making them stress, what are the problems they feel they have, and therefore might help them to go focus on the school. I like very much this project, but I don't know if the students they are actually gonna go looking for the adult, because not all the students like to talk to people they don't know. Sometimes they don't even like to talk to anybody about their problems. And so, but there are some that they do like to talk. And so this project is actually a good thing. In my opinion, I think if schools have more programs where they include nature, like taking them for, I don't know, once a month to a hike, they don't need to do much, but just bring them to the nature and hike for hours and then back. Just that, no phones, nothing that is, a device. And I think probably that will help, sort of. Also yoga, meditation, maybe sometime during the week. One of my friends who has a child in Washington Liberty, she said that they do not offer yoga or meditation in PT. And she said her daughter really will be very happy to have that, because she has some mental health problems, and she's not the only one. So she said that if you could mention it, that would be very good.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go back over the list again? How about for bullying? Any thoughts on that one? Or safety? Opportunities to make some changes? Any data we need before we can make recommendations?
Did we see a change in the data when they got rid of SROs? I know that's a controversial topic, and depending on who you ask, it may make, they may feel safer with no SROs.
Yeah, it depends who you are, whether you feel safer or more safe without SROs. Can I ask a point of clarity? Actually, Grace, I have often wondered and never said why they don't include the sometimes people in the positive. Because as an existential student of life, feeling happy sometimes is about as good as it gets. So I've often wondered why the top two is frequently and almost. Is that, and I'm sure that is explained somewhere in the survey, but I honestly, maybe I'm being like a cockeyed optimist here, but I've often wondered why the top two are the only ones we include, because some of these like 30, 40 numbers they're kind of alarmist. Like if you feel happy sometimes, you're good to go in my book.
So
That's
it's not always baby. So it's not always the top two. I mean, we spend a lot of time looking at those. One of the ones that we took out, the compare between 2 years, between 2020 and now, is because we changed what was considered favorable. I think it was one of those ones. So I mean, this is something that I believe for this one went back to student services and said, is this the appropriate, like, is this what you would consider favorable? Okay. I mean, we're not the experts on those kinds of things.
No, I know that Panorama has a lot more experience with
this. They do. No, I mean, like we went to student, I mean, they put together what they think is right, but then they will come back I mean, we will then go back for something like this, and I'm 90% sure that I flagged this when we looked at it and said we need to talk to student services, and I think student services signed off. So like the counseling team.
Okay.
I believe, I mean, that's my recollection of it, but again, this was months ago. So
Yeah, and I'm
I
pretty
agree
sure
with you. I mean, I think it could also be an age thing, you know, like when you're in high school and middle school and in elementary school, sometimes maybe not isn't good enough. I mean, I think we know a lot more. Like as we grow older, we're like, yeah, I'm happy sometimes still.
Yeah.
Like I think that's more of like a growing thing, but that's my recollection.
Okay. Just throwing that out there. Yeah, because there is some difference in the responded favorably being the top one, the top two, or and it depends on the nature of the question. And I know that a lot of time was spent deciding that, but that's another reason, like we can't compare, certainly can't compare YVM to this, and we can't compare sometimes, you know, the past. I do like to look at nationally because it gives perspective. And I think in that you have to pick your like top two things you want to work on and see what it says and go from there. So I think that would be the next step. And
Sally,
yes.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. Are you in the SEL? Is that what you were just showing me about did you feel happy?
Yes, this is SEL.
Okay, so as in my team, had zero to do with this.
Right.
So I actually don't know who decided it was the top two.
Gotcha.
My understanding is that they just left it to Panorama. Whereas in Your Voice Matters, we went over every question and every response to decide what was considered favorable and what wasn't. So I don't know about this. So you'd have to bring in Laura or Wendy or somebody else to speak to this. Sorry.
No problem. No, and I just was
confusing it with another question
to demonstrate that it's not comparable between the two surveys too.
So how are we going to explain that to the administrators and the boards and the public, that the two surveys with similar questions and different answers can't be compared? It seems to me that that's fairly misleading. You know, then you can now pick and choose whichever one you like that has the data the closest to your public policy position. So I see how it happened, and it's not unreasonable, but the SEL data is going to be repeated. We're not going to see Your Voice Matters for a couple of years. So it's the SEL that's going to get all the attention for the next 2 years if we don't choose something from Your Voice Matters to counter it and then have to explain that they're different. So think of yourself as an administrator or a board member, and you're making some effort to fix something, and you have this conflict. And you ask, why did you do this? And our answer is, well, we don't have anything to do with that survey. That's a nationally administered survey, fixed questions.
I personally don't think there's a lot of overlap. If I'm going to look for social emotional stuff, I'm going to the SEL. If I'm going to look for climate, I'm going to Your Voice Matters as an administrator. And we worked hard to not have duplicate questions on those surveys. So, I mean, I think it's up, you know, as a Your Voice Matters, we're talking to our departments and saying, here's your data, here's, you know, what you can look at. I've talked to administrators. I've had sit downs with administrators to go through data and how to navigate this. I don't know what SEL is doing. We can help. I mean, the same with Your Voice Matters. I mean, I can help administer this, but I am not an SEL expert. And that is, I mean, that can be something to raise, but I personally don't see these two surveys as something to compare. I think they're complementary, and they shouldn't, I don't think the purpose is to pit them against each other. In my experience, and then we're gonna get Virginia Youth Survey soon, and those data points will be used to I'm sorry, people are talking. And that data can be used. I mean, that should probably be the primary focus, and then using these two surveys, because they're surveys and not specific data points, to kind of cement some of these issues. But I don't think they're meant to be contradictory or should be presented that way. So just my thoughts.
We have the luxury of a meeting and a discussion and your explanation, but I'm not sure when somebody looks at the APS site, they're going to distinguish why there are two different surveys, why they can't be compared, why the data is different. And why in some cases it was the top one, sometimes the top two, every once in a while, the top three of the answers that they consider to be favorable. So I'm more worried about the interpretation by those who will do something about it, school administrators, maybe the county and the board members and the public, than I am what we think of it. Are you planning to, Grace, are you going to be making a presentation to the school boards on either of any of these?
I am not. I don't know what SEL is planning on doing. For Your Voice Matters, we are giving it up to the different departments. So when professional learning needs to speak to the school board, they can pull out data points from here. When secondary education needs to speak to the school board, they will pull data out of here. And if they invite us to assist and to participate, that is when we do.
So because they complement each other, the surveys, shouldn't we just look at if questions overlap in the surveys, shouldn't we just look at the latest answers, 2022, I believe, and of one of the surveys, and then the rest of the questions that are not in that survey, then just look at them on the other survey. And so we can have, more updated information of how people are answering.
Let's assume we do something like that. What do we do with the information we gather? How do we, we will individually be a little wiser as to what these surveys mean. We are today, thank you to Grace's explanation. And so what do we do from there? We're a little wiser. We can see some comparisons. We have some thoughts. We report to the partnership. We dissolve and act as individuals.
I think we need to be prepared to explain the different survey methodologies in terms of why they, may be different. But yeah, I'm assuming for any of these hot button issues, whether it's safety, emotional regulation, that we want to put the data in front of decision makers. And I think in the past, there's been a communications component. Do we want to try to get something out there in the media? And if so, what? What do we want to highlight? Our now is easy, especially if you can, add a graphic. Washington Post is a little harder to crack. But yeah, I would think that we would want to, whatever we want to highlight, we want to get out there and be able to explain the differences if it comes up.
I see a screen share jumping around. Comments on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it back up just to see what stands out on YVM to people, and yeah, what you think you want your focus to be, sort of, and then from there, what the purpose of that focus, if it's to get on and WMU and get somebody from APS to talk about, hey, it's not that bad, or yes, it's all doom and gloom, and it is the end of the world as we know it. To be prepared for that. So, and in the past, APCYF has had multiple reports, multiple sessions with groups that have asked this can be useful for. But yeah, what is the next step, sort of, is what I'm hoping.
And John, you had asked earlier, does it matter how we compare to others nationally? I think it does. Arlington is a community at the aggregate level that's used to, we're the fittest, we're the most educated, we're this, we're that. But when you disaggregate the data, you can see some scary stuff. When we are way below the rest of the nation, I think that's noteworthy.
Because we're such achievers. We have to do everything like more, better, bigger, harder, and faster in Arlington.
And that could be a problem. Maybe some of the stuff is that we're all chronic overachievers, and we're pushing our kids really hard.
Highest educated parent group, and
Well, the APS website points out that the school district is in the top 2% in the country by somebody's rating, and these red dots on the screen don't indicate that we're in the top 2% on those indicators. So we are not in the top 2% on any of these, not even the top 20%. So yeah, I agree. The Second Chance program was created because of a survey that said we're doing worse than Virginia, not because our teens were drinking and doing drugs, but because we were worse than the average. So there's a political message in worse than average. Well, we've got some progress today. We've got some questions that are open. And before we wrap up, I wanted to give people a chance to say something if they wish.
John, thank you for keeping us on track.
Yes, thank you.
Anecdotally, when I got to college, everyone said, oh, you're from Arlington. How many therapists do you have? And that was in 1992. So we have a rep and we must uphold that rep.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. Self-efficacy may be tied to, it's a speculation, obviously, to our relative affluence. Like when my youngest one, he started working at Harris Teeter, just to see change in his ability to interact with adults and advocate for himself. Other parts of the nation, a lot of kids have to work.
Yes.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also anecdotally, when you look at that, these are compared nationally. I mean, they have been headline after headline after headline about how poorly students in these age brackets are doing on social emotional. They are not coping post-pandemic, if we're even post-pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so comparing these nationally, the numbers are down already. But then Arlington's even lower than that. I mean, these are crisis level numbers, in my opinion, if we're looking at these students, because they're not just like below the national average on a normal year. We're below the national average on a post-pandemic already crisis level for these age students. So just, I mean, the climate survey is great, and the climate survey provides a lot of information, but this to me is your argument, your data to back up. And we're going to get the BYS to look at that self-efficacy, that social awareness, sense of belonging, I believe is in there too. So some more final 2 cents. I have to jump off to another meeting, but thanks guys.
So you know, John, you mentioned that there are several programs already that improve the to improve the SEL for students in Arlington Public Schools, and you mentioned as well that we need help from parents and the community because and so I think all these problems that the children are feeling are mostly coming not precisely from a school, but from home, because I believe we need to help parents to make sure how to, not to teach them how to be parents because nobody has to teach parents how to be parents, but to guide some of them how to do, how to deal with the students, when they are feeling down, when they are having problems, and they don't want to talk and all that, because parents are very, very busy, but I know, but I think it's a big need for students to feel all these problems that we are talking about. I don't think the school alone is gonna fix them. I think we need to work with the community and the parents to have these percentages higher. So, and improve the social emotional learning.
Clearly the question about reaching parents and convincing parents is something that has been talked about from every committee I've been on for decades. And so we can certainly add that to our own agenda. My own outside of this committee soapbox is worrying about 0 to 5. I want kids to be ready for school when they start. And I think that's not APS's problem because they aren't in school yet. And I think that's the county problem and public health problem and hospitals and pediatricians and parents and caregivers. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of reaching outside the system. Institutions can only do so much. They have too many people to deal with. And if the individuals in there don't always trust the teachers or the counselors, which we do here, they're not going to go seek help. So we've got to find ways to do that. It's a lovely subject. Let's consider that for next time. I won't rush you into the next meeting. This last one, I hurried up because there will be some pressure from the state of Virginia to hold meetings in person. And I know from most of you when we first spoke that in person is going to be more difficult. So I'm trying to get as many of the virtual meetings in as I can before we have to confront maybe the possibility of going in person. So I like in person, but people are busy right now and I don't want to push on that. That's all I have to say. Megan, did you want to have any closing remarks? Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you, John.
Well, thank you all for being very patient. We've wandered a lot today and I don't know how much we've come to great conclusions, but I think there's some valuable information. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank
See you
you
next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.